Life in America in 1836. Historical note: Spanish explorers first saw Texas in 1519. They named the region Tejas, the Indian word for friend. The Spanish mostly ignored the vast region for the next 150 years. In 1685, explorer Robert La Salle landed in Texas and claimed it for France. Word of La Salle's fort made Spain realize the need for strengthening its claim to Texas. Between 1690 and 1793, Spain established 36 missions in Texas for the purpose of converting native Indians to the Catholic religion, to establish Spanish settlements, and to thwart French claims. Mission San Antonio de Valero, later known as the Alamo, was one of several missions built near the San Antonio River. Established in 1718, the Valero mission was abandoned by the Padres and Friars around 1790. From 1801 to 1825, the mission was occupied by Spanish soldiers and converted into a fort. During this time it became known as the Alamo, the Spanish word for cottonwood tree. San Antonio de Baxter, the settlement that grew up around the mission in this area, became the largest Spanish town in Texas. In 1821, Mexico declared her independence from Spain, and a young general, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, emerged as a Mexican war hero. The new Republic of Mexico agreed to allow Americans to colonize Texas, mainly as a buffer zone between Mexican settlements and Indian raids. Men who received permission from the Mexican government to bring families to Texas were called empresarios. Stephen F. Austin was the first impresario to lead American families to Texas. Austin's colony, whose main settlement was San Felipe de Austin on the Brazos River, was the largest. The second largest colony was established by Impresario Green DeWitt, and its main town was Gonzales on the Guadalupe River. The colonists had several stringent criteria to pass. They had to be of high moral character. They had to agree to become Mexican citizens and obey Mexico's constitution. They had to become Catholics. They had to settle the land within a limited time period. In exchange, they received large land grants and were exempt from taxes and duties for several years. A colony consisted of farmers and ranchers spread out over hundreds of square miles, and also small towns. The towns contained merchant shops, blacksmith shops, doctors, lawyers, and supply stores. Early settlers had no schools or churches. The Texans quickly built homes out of logs and planted corn, their main food. Wealthy planters brought slaves with them and established successful cotton plantations. Isolated from the United States and from Mexico City, these Texans flourished and became self-sufficient. They made their own clothes, furniture, soap, candles, and tools. They ate venison, wild fowl, or domestic pigs for meat. They captured wild mustangs that roamed the countryside in great herds, as well as longhorn cattle that likewise roamed free. They rarely saw Mexican officials or a Catholic priest. Most did not speak Spanish and did not trade or associate with the Mexican citizens of Texas, the Tejanos. They remained American in beliefs and actions. For several years, Americans flooded into Texas, including thousands of illegal squatters. By 1830, there were over 30,000 English-speaking Texans, 5,000 slaves, and only 4,000 Spanish-speaking Tejanos, mostly living in San Antonio de Baxar. Alarmed by this, the Mexican government passed the law of 1830 prohibiting further immigration of Americans. This caused great resentment among the Texans. General Santa Anna was elected president of Mexico in 1833. He believed in a dictatorial form of government and gradually began taking away the power of the individual states in the republic. He abolished the Constitution of 1824, levied taxes and duties, and sent soldiers to Texas. Texans had no representation in the Mexican government, and the state capital was hundreds of miles away in Coahuila. Texans held conventions to discuss action. In 1833, Stephen F. Austin took a list of grievances to Mexico City. He was arrested and jailed, contracting a lung disease while there. After being released in 1835, He no longer believed that a peaceful solution was possible. By 1835, the unrest had grown, and several clashes occurred between Texans and Mexican soldiers. When Santa Anna garrisoned soldiers in the Alamo, Texans expected the worst and called to Americans for help. In the States, volunteers formed companies to fight for Texas in exchange for free land. Most of the volunteers were young adventurers looking for a fight and the spoils of war. The first battle of the war occurred in Tiny Gonzales, when Mexican soldiers tried to take back a small cannon given to the colonists for protection from the Indians. The Texans refused to give it up, unfurling a white flag that read, "Come and take it." Hundreds of volunteers flocked to Texas to take part in the war. Some Tejanos joined the Texican cause also. In December 1835, a band of Texans, Tejanos, and volunteers from the States drove the Mexican soldiers from the Alamo in the Battle of Bexar. Most of the Texans, whose farms needed working, returned home. That left only 150 men at San Antonio to fortify and defend the Alamo. No one worried about General Santa Anna because it was winter, the wrong time of year to move armies. But a furious Santa Anna gathered 6,000 soldiers, artillery, and supplies, and force-marched them across the Mexican desert and mountains into Texas. Many soldiers were green conscripts from tropical Mexico who had never experienced cold weather and who were wearing thin cotton clothing and no shoes. Hit by a severe blizzard, several hundred soldiers died from hunger and exposure, as did many pack animals. Santa Anna's advance guard arrived in San Antonio on February 23, 1836, much to the surprise of the Texans, who had just celebrated General George Washington's birthday with a lively fandango. They hurriedly secured themselves inside the Alamo, along with several Tejanos and a few women and children. The siege lasted 13 days, with no Texan casualties until the final assault on March 6th. In spite of several heartfelt pleas for help from William Travis, the 26-year-old commander, only 32 men came to his aid, all from Tiny Gonzales. According to some historians, Travis drew a line in the sand with his sword on their final night and gave the men the opportunity to stay and face death or to leave. Only one man, Louis Moses Rose, an experienced Napoleonic soldier, refused to step over the line. Word of the fall of the Alamo also reached the settlements by way of Susanna Dickinson. She, her baby girl, and Joe, the black servant of Travis's, were the only Americans to survive the battle. Young James Allen narrowly escaped because Travis chose him to be the last messenger to deliver a final desperate plea to Colonel Fannin in Goliad. Learning that the Mexican army was marching toward the settlements, the colonists fled east toward the United States in the runaway scrape. Having only 375 men in the Texas Army, General Sam Houston ordered a retreat. As the worst rains in memory thrashed the fleeing soldiers, the women and children endured deplorable conditions. Swollen rivers carried off wagons, horses, and people. Bad water caused dysentery and typhoid. Diseases such as whooping cough, measles, and pneumonia killed many children. Close behind the fleeing settlers, Santa Anna's army steadily marched eastward. Near the small town of Goliad, south of Gonzales, Mexicans captured about 400 Texans and volunteers. On Palm Sunday, March 27th, the unarmed prisoners were massacred. Houston continued his retreat, waiting for the right time to attack, much to the disgruntlement of many settlers. Santa Anna split his forces, and on April 21st, 1836, near the San Jacinto River, Houston finally made a bold daytime attack and defeated the Mexican troops to the shouts of, "Remember the Alamo! Remember Goliad!" Santa Anna, who escaped by dressing as a private, was captured and forced to sign a treaty recognizing Texas independence. Santa Anna returned to Mexico, where he was ousted, but returned to power several more times during his lifetime. The Republic of Texas flourished between 1836 and 1845, and thousands of Americans and Europeans immigrated there. Texas joined the Union in December 1845, becoming the 28th state. Soon the Mexican War erupted between the United States and Mexico. General Santa Anna led Mexican forces once again, but was defeated. In 1847, Mexico ceded California and its other lands, opening up what became the American West. Texas girls wore long dresses while they performed household tasks. On special occasions, they dressed in fancier gowns with a petticoat underneath. Bonnets were worn with all different clothes. Women and girls worked hard all day long. Farm life required them to make their own soap. Fat from slaughtered farm animals was boiled in a large iron pot over a fire and mixed with lye, an alkaline substance made from ashes and water. The mixture was then poured into molds, where it gradually thickened into soap. Although effective for cleansing, lye soap was very harsh on the skin. For enjoyment, Texans, who called themselves Texans long ago, gathered together for fandangos or dances, to listen to lively music and socialize. These celebrations were often quite rowdy and would last late into the night. Prior to the 1800s, the Spanish and Mexican population had built mostly primitive adobe houses in Texas. With the introduction of log houses by the Anglo-Americans, a new architectural style began to develop in Texas. Log houses often consisted of 2 rooms, with a dog trot or open hall between them, and an attic space used for sleeping. Doors from each room connected to the dog trot, making it a useful area for hanging wash on rainy days, storing meat in the winter, and relaxing on hot days. Mexican girls and women dressed in long ruffled skirts. Many skirts were woven with vibrant colors and worn with ruffled petticoats. This typical hacienda on a Mexican ranch in the 1800s was built on one level and made of wood, adobe, and tile. 3 wings arranged in a U provided shade for a garden or a patio. A veranda or roofed porch ran along each wing. All rooms opened onto the veranda, which provided a cool place for outdoor living. The war for Texan independence began when Mexican soldiers came to take the 6-pounder cannon from Texans at Gonzales. The Texans refused, flying a flag that said, "Come and take it." The Texan volunteers wore ragged buckskins and used rifles to defend themselves. The Mexican army wore uniforms in dark blue and white with leather hats or plain white fatigues. Several thousand in number, they were equipped with many cannons and had well-trained military leadership. This ad, issued in New Orleans before the news of the defeat at the Alamo, offered free land to inhabitants of the United States willing to volunteer to fight for the independence of Texas. Ads often spoke harshly against Mexicans, who were considered the Texans' enemy. However, many Mexican Texans, called Tejanos, fought bravely against Santa Anna and his soldiers. 46 days after the battle at Alamo, Sam Houston led a small group of Americans in combat, surprised the Mexican troops, and captured Santa Anna, who was forced to sign a treaty declaring Texas an independent state. In 1836, Houston was elected the first president of Texas. At the Battle of the Alamo on March 6, 1836, fewer than 200 Texans attempted to defend the old mission. Spanning over 3 acres, it proved too expansive to secure, and the Texans were overcome and brutally defeated by the Mexican army. All of the rebel soldiers were killed in less than 2 hours, and over 600 Mexicans died as well. The Alamo was founded in 1718 by Spanish padres as the Mission San Antonio de Valero. This earliest photograph of the Alamo, as it appeared in the 1850s, shows the long barracks at the left, where the padres lived. The hump on the church was not built until 1847, many years after the Battle of the Alamo. Today, the long barracks serves as a museum, and the Alamo Chapel is referred to as the Shrine of Texas Liberty. In 1833, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna took control of Mexico. A former politician and soldier in the Spanish army, Santa Anna was a skilled and ruthless leader. During his rule as president, he eliminated the Mexican Constitution of 1824, which was similar to the U.S. Constitution, and acted as a dictator. Texans lost their political voice, and even those loyal to Mexico, known as Peace Party members, opposed Santa Anna's dictatorship. Susanna Dickinson was a real person who, with her baby daughter Angelina, survived the Battle of the Alamo, as did 12 others, mostly Mexican women and children. Her husband, Captain Almiron Dickinson, a member of the rebel army, was killed in the battle. Turkey in the Straw was a popular song in Texas in 1836 and was often played on the fiddle. The top map is a modern map of the United States showing the approximate location of Gonzales, Texas. The bottom map shows the cities and rivers that played an important role in Texas history in 1836. If you enjoyed this book, please like and share so that others may enjoy it as well.